So all the big tech companies, including Google, Apple, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, all of them in the recent years, we've seen a massive push for Indic languages across their platforms coming from these companies. Now, Nikhil, what is this? What is the reason behind this massive push behind Indian languages and just supporting Indian languages left, right, and center?
I've been waiting for this push for Indian languages for years now. I'm very happy that over the last 3 years actually, there's been a concerted effort, and there's a reason for that. There are more Indians coming online now than ever before. About in 2008, and I'm really old in this space, we had about 50 million internet users, 2008, 2009. I think it was in 2011 that we hit 100 million. And now we have over 500 million internet users in India, right? And so I think what's happening is that most of the English language users, that base got consolidated, that base got addressed a long time ago. Okay. And now what they're realizing is that outside of that base, in not only like you have in urban cities, there are many people who don't speak English as a language. You have outside of urban cities, in smaller towns and smaller cities where people don't use English as their primary language. They have functional usage, so they will use a little bit in terms of knowing how to navigate an operating system. So for me, the one historically the biggest challenge for evolution of Indian languages used to be the physical keyboard on those devices when people had Blackberries or Nokia phones and not smartphones with virtual keyboards. And that's the single most important thing that happened, that virtual keyboards became possible. Yeah. And then the next issue was, how is that keyboard going to be? There was no standardization of keyboards. Even today there are different variations of how keyboards are going to be. So there's a company called Reverie that has its own keyboard. Google has its own keyboard.
Apple has its own keyboard.
Apple has its own keyboard. Because Hindi and many Indian languages are complex in terms of one matra or another matra, yes. It becomes difficult to do it. So yes. I think also artificial intelligence in terms of predicting words in Indian languages has also benefited. So it's easier to type. Yeah. I like using Hindi in occasionally because I just feel it's a more natural way of reading it. Transliterated keyboards are not that easy. Yes. I remember I was at a event in Bombay called Fiki Frames, and there was a Hindi language journalist there who was reporting on the event. Mm-hmm. So he used to open Google transliteration page and used to type in English on an English keyboard, but it used to get translated into Hindi text, and he used to submit his stories like that. But for him it's his job. It's not easy for everyone to do it, and not everyone will do it.
Yes.
So I think we've come a long way. The other thing that you have to keep in mind is the evolution of voice and video, because this is an era when India's got the cheapest data prices in the world. We've got something like, it's 1 GB per day. Yeah. I mean, who gets that? Everyone who comes to India that I meet from abroad, they're stunned by how cheap data is. Yes. And you've also got better AI in terms of translating.
Yes.
So for people to use, one is that a lot more people are using voice and voice calling, but also many of us, we've started using voice to text in terms of writing, but also because of evolution of technology, many of these apps can now understand Indian languages. So if you speak to Google Assistant in Hindi, they'll understand it. If you speak in Punjabi, I think they would understand it. In Siri, they've got Hindi as well. I think Siri has got it. Alexa does.
I think Siri is one exception in which it doesn't really support Hindi.
Okay.
But Alexa just got an update just a day before Google Assistant.
So Alexa does. But Google Assistant has had that for a while, where you could talk to the Google Assistant in Hindi. Also, they've started. So a friend of mine many years ago working with Google said that, and this was going back to 2009, we were going for a conference in Pune, I remember, and he said that text to voice, which is what is written in a language, and converting it into voice is easy. The real challenge that the world has to solve is voice to text, so understanding various accents and languages. I remember Google used to run this service, a call center in Hyderabad once upon a time, where you would call in, you would ask them for information, and they would tell you the Google search results. And we were wondering, what is the point of a technology company doing this? One assumption that we had, because it was eventually shut down, is that they were collecting voice samples.
Well,
So that they could correlate that with text or understand Indian accents, because even the Indian accent in English is very complicated. It's not, just like we can't understand a Scottish accent very easily.
Yes.
Indians can't necessarily, like Scots probably can't understand an Indian accent very easily.
Yes.
So I think that was a really, really important move that has happened. But also, if you think about it, most of consumption of content in India is actually on video now.
Yeah.
And that's happening because that there isn't enough content, or there isn't enough easy to get content. TikTok is huge. ShareChat, when it was launched with the objective of having Indian language only content for Indian language only users.
Yes.
So we've come a really long way. We've got browsers that have Indian language interfaces. The most important thing was operating systems that have Indian language interfaces.
Yes.
Xiaomi did that.
Yes.
So I think we're in a space right now where a lot more work has to be done,
Sure.
especially from Indian language developers, because otherwise you're just reliant on Google and Microsoft and Amazon and Apple to do that. Like the biggest thing, to be honest, is Indian language interface for e-commerce.
Sure.
Because how the value chain works is that when I remember a publisher complaining that when they were trying to sell advertising, for Indian language advertising, they used to pay much lower rates than for English language advertising, even though this used to be on an Indian language website.
Oh, okay.
Because they had the creatives already set, and they had this assumption that an Indian language speaking person is going to be lower revenue.
Understand.
The Indian internet has grown because of e-commerce.
Yeah.
Because e-commerce has when you click on an ad, there is a direct route to a transaction.
Yes.
So it's not a branding ad. So therefore, e-commerce companies have spent the most because that's how they make money, by selling things.
Yes.
Right? So advertising has grown because of e-commerce. Because advertising has grown, content has grown.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, I think it's great that as we have more and more Indian language advertising, as the Indian language user base becomes larger than the English language user base, as advertisers and publishers realize that there is value, and those people are also willing to pay for buying things of Flipkart and Amazon and any other e-commerce website that exists, they will start supporting that ecosystem a lot more. So they will start advertising in those languages. So I don't think there's a problem really with that. So as e-commerce evolves, Amazon has just launched a Hindi website, right?
Yes.
In the same way, Flipkart, I think, has launched or launching.
I think there are certain.
There are attempts to do. Snapdeal was the first to do it, in fact, many years ago.
Yes.
Because I think the trick with e-commerce is that the catalog has to be available in that language. The reviews have to be available in that language.
Yes.
So there's time to go. But the way I'm looking at it, coming back from someone who was covering Indian language internet and trying to figure out what can be done to make it work back in 2007, 2008, I think we've come a long way.
Sure.
There is progress. And I think we're going to continue to progress on that path. So it is great for India.
Absolutely. So as you realize now that Indic language push is indeed a great achievement done by big tech companies, will include inclusion for a lot of Indians.
I want to say one more thing.
Sure.
There is a lot of criticism of foreign companies operating in India.
Yeah.
It's very clear. The foreign companies are the ones who have invested in these Indian language interfaces.
Yes.
Reverie is the only major company that comes to mind for me that has consistently invested a lot. They got the timing right. There used to be a couple of other companies in the past. But really the big bucks have been spent on developing technology for our country by Google first off.
Sure.
So I think in all this talk about the Swadeshi movement for the Indian internet, we have to realize that these tech companies have actually enabled it. Sure, they benefit from it. It's good business for them.
Completely.
But as a country, we benefited from them doing what benefits them. So it makes a case for allowing more people to compete in the Indian market, because competition will lead to advancement.
Absolutely.
And it will lead to more people doing more things to serve Indian users and Indian customers.
Absolutely. So if you want us to keep doing these interesting videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel.